All right, it's time for another top 10 list. The top 10 archetype specific boss monsters in the game. Now, obviously, when making a top 10 list, I feel it is important to define the evaluation criteria for the creation of the list. For this list, there are four major points of judgment. First, how effective is the card now? I.e., how useful is it in the current meta? Not how useful was it when it was first released. Also, for this category, obviously, cards that banish or spin get more points than cards that just destroy, and those that do not target are more valuable than those that simply target. Two, how easy or consistent is its summon? Obviously, it could be the best boss monster in the world, but if it's a pain in the butt to actually put on the field in the first place, it's not going to be very useful, i.e., it's not going to be very good. Three, how game-changing is the monster when it hits the field, both during your turn and your opponent's turn? Obviously, there's a premium on negation and/or interruption. Four, how well does the effect work in conjunction with its archetype? Basically, what type of synergy does it have, and how well supported is it by the rest of the deck? Because, like it or not, while boss monsters are the boss, they typically do not operate in a vacuum. Therefore, it is important to consider how well they work within the archetype they are the boss of. Also, there were some important exclusions that must be addressed. First, kaijus and similar monsters were not considered in the evaluation because kaijus out almost everything. Note that this rationality was largely used in the game-changing portion of the evaluation. Two, obviously, this is an archetype boss monsters list, so no purely generic boss monsters, i.e., no Chaos Emperor Dragon, Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, Dark Arm Dragon, Obelisk the Tormentor, etc. However, a monster like Psyframe Lord Omega was considered because while it has a generic summoning condition, it is clearly the boss monster for Psyframes. Three, I excluded boss monsters I thought should never have been made in the first place. Basically, those monsters with rather blanket immunity, i.e., Before Towers, Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King, Super Quantum Mech King, Great Magnus. Four, the monster needs to generally be thought of as the boss monster, not just be the best monster for the given archetype. For example, for Masked Heroes, Darklaw is definitely the best monster, but Chaos is the boss monster. However, when the issue was close, like between Fright for Sabretooth and Fright for Chimera, I evaluated the better monster. So, with the evaluation criteria set and the exclusions mentioned, let's go to the list. Number 10, Fright for Sabretooth. To start off, if this was a list of most important monster to an archetype, this guy would probably be number 2, just behind Darklaw, because if Sabretooth did not exist, then Fluffles in the coming Link format would more than likely be dead on arrival as a competitive deck. However, Sabretooth does exist and is one heck of a useful boss monster. It is at least a 2800 attacker because it boosts all Fright for monsters by 400 attack, which may not seem like much, but can be critical when you have multiple Fright for monsters that can swing multiple times. When summoned, Sabretooth is also able to summon a previously summoned Fright for fusion from the graveyard, which heavily mitigates the cost associated with its own summons, and also helps clear the field, especially when that associated monster is a Kraken or a Sheep that can better deal with monsters, or sets up the finishing blow if Tiger was previously used to smash through the field. Finally, using three materials, which is very commonplace for Sabretooth summoning, results in a Sabretooth that cannot be destroyed either by battle or card effect, allowing it to play defense as well as offense, giving the deck a chance to recover if an OTK push fails. Number 9, Chaos Ancient Gear Giant. Some may be surprised to see this guy on the list, but when looking at its capabilities, that surprise should quickly be discarded. First, it is an OTK machine as a 4500 attacker that can hit all opponent monsters and brings the piercing pain. Now, I have never been a fan of piercing, but when backed up by 4500 attack points, even I will give piercing the thumbs up in this circumstance. That Your opponent wants to try to stop its advance? Well, his or her options are rather limited, as Giant is unaffected by spell and trap cards and disallows the activation of monster effects during the battle phase. Yeah, the battle phase itself, not just when Giant attacks and until the end of the damage step like most ancient gears. So if the opponent wants to eliminate Giant, he or she better do it basically right when it's summoned. Ah, there's the rub to why this nearly unstoppable beast is only number 9 on the list. It is a fusion monster that requires 4 Ancient Gear monsters to summon. Fortunately, Pound, Ancient Gear Box, Ancient Gear Wyvern, and Overload Fusion makes this summoning much easier than it probably should be, but 4 monsters is still 4 monsters, and the opponent does need to have some monster presence on the field for it to produce its maximum potential. Number 8. Lunalight Leo Dancer. When looking at Leo Dancer, what's not to like? It's a 3500 double attacker that cannot be targeted or destroyed by opponent card effects, that can nuke the opponent's field of special summoned monsters after its first attack. 99% of the time, Leo will clear all of the monsters on your opponent's board. However, similar to Chaos Giant, that summoning condition is a rather annoying one at the current time, demanding a Panther Dancer and 2 other Leo-Light monsters, or a bricky card like Fusion Tag. Fortunately, the level of synergy within the deck significantly aids that summoning condition, largely flanked by Wolf. Overall, the synergy is why Leo Dancer is higher than Chaos Giant, for it is also not difficult to bump Leo from 3500 to 7000 via Blue Cat's effect, taking some of the pressure off of your opponent having a big board in order to create an OTK. Overall, the interesting thing about Leo Dancer is its placement on this list would differ if OCG cards were being evaluated as well, for Calladio Chick significantly increases the consistency of its summons, and Crimson Fox significantly increases the consistency of it ending the duel after it hits the field. But, unfortunately for the TCG, neither of these cards currently exist, thus Leo Dancer finds its spot at number 8.
Number 7. Imperium Magnum, the Superconductive Battle Bot.
Sometimes there are cards that just seem to be version 2s of older cards, and Magnum seems to take after Quasar, only in my opinion it's a little bit better. A 4000 hitter that is relatively easy to summon when in a deck designed to maximize its summons probability. It has a Quasar-like free once per turn quick play negation effect of any opponent card effect. Also similar to Quasar, Magnum floats when it leaves the field, but this time into a 3000 attacker that can destroy any number of cards on the opponent's field as long as fuel exists in the graveyard, and a 3500 attacker. So even after the opponent spends a number of cards to remove it from the field, they still have other meaningful threats to deal with that could end the duel when your next turn rolls around. The drawback to Magnum is, of course, the summoning condition, for while it is not difficult to meet, it is also not easy to achieve consistently either. Number 6. Zodiac Trident. While there is no clear-cut boss monster for the Zodiac archetype, I feel the simple reality is that Trident is far and away the most annoying single monster for the opponent to actually deal with, for while Broad Bull is a solid searcher and play extender, any opponent really should worry about Trident the most because of Trident's ability to interfere with their own playmaking. Trident is ridiculously easy to summon, and its synergy with Zodiacs is rather insane for producing various secondary effects, from banishing anything that dares attempt to remove it via battle, if the opponent can even muster up something that has the attack points due to the ability of Trident to climb to 3000 plus attack rather easily, to various cards that can negate targeted means of removal. The one major drawback to Trident is that it only destroys, which is not that great in the modern meta, but the ability to take down any face-up card, monster, spell, or trap, is definitely quality, especially during the opponent's turn. Overall, Trident is a great example of a synergistic boss monster taking advantage of the resources provided by its archetype, both in its summons and the effectiveness of its effect. Number 5. ABC Dragon Buster. There might have been a time in the very recent past when ABC Dragon Buster would have been in the top 3 on this list. A 3000 attacker that was rather easy to summon, not having to bother with those caveman fusion summoning techniques like using polymerizations like some of the other monsters on this list. Shout out in some sense to Gladiator Beasts for being the first, but not the best, with contact fusion. A quick play targeted banish ability that can wreak havoc on the opponent as an interrupter. While it does require a discard, based on the common construction of the deck, this discard was commonly only a soft cost, either fueling additional Dragon Buster summoning or netting other positives from the discard. The ability to jump out of the way during the opponent's turn to fill the field with its pieces to provide defense and more field control and more potential pluses, in addition to setting up other Dragon Busters for the future turn, was just the cherry on top of the annoyance sundae for opponents. Finally, the fact that you could attach A, B, or C to Dragon Buster to provide additional layers of protection made it even more dangerous to remove from the field. Unfortunately, the fall from grace for Dragon Buster was not due to its own deficiencies, but the loss of significant summoning consistency due to the rise of cards that could easily wipe out Union Hangar or cards that could just simply remove its pieces from the graveyard before it had the chance to complete its fusion summons. In the current meta now, if Buster hits the field, it can still do damage. However, this reality of its summons has dropped rather significantly in probability. Number 4, Cosmo Dark Destroyer. There is not much to say about Dark Destroyer that various players have not cursed and harangued about over the course of the last few years. A 3000 attacker that destroys a monster when summoned and cannot be targeted by opponent card effects. If that were not enough, it commonly float into a 2800 attacker that cannot be targeted by opponent card effects and restores 1000 life points during the controller's standby phase. Also, it is rather obnoxiously easy to summon, even during the opponent's turn, allowing it to act as a quality interrupter that can easily frustrate the opponent as well as control the field. In addition, Destroyer can be added back to the hand relatively easily to set up its summons once again. Finally, Destroyer is a nasty element in most Cosmo OTK combinations, allowing it to destroy its own ships to fuel more damage. Overall, one can argue that the moral of the story for a great archetype boss monster is easy to summon, controls the field, and is a pain in the butt to get rid of. Check, check, and check for Dark Destroyer. Number 3, Spiral Sleeper. When I look at Sleeper, I just see Dryden on steroids. While its 2800 attack is not game breaking, it is enough to do significant damage and provide some field control. Its summons condition is rather easily met when in the right deck, and it is searchable. However, we all know what invites Sleeper to this party. The ability to destroy 2 cards during either player's turn makes it a vicious interrupter, heavily limiting opponent options for a counterattack. Now, one may question the proficiency of this interruption effect because of the spiral card cost and the fact that it does destroy, but that's where deck synergy comes into play. Recall that I said Dryden was a great representation of an example of a synergistic boss monster taking advantage of the resources provided by its archetype, both in its summons and the effectiveness of its effect. Well, Sleeper is an almost perfect example, with Spiral Resort eliminating the ability to target it, and Last Resort eliminating the ability to destroy it. These protection effects, combined with its own interruption effect, make Sleeper one heck of a boss monster for the Dark Horse Spiral deck. Number 2, Totally Awesome. The no doubt about it boss monster of frogs. Totally Awesome is rather nasty as a negator insult to injury. Not only is the card's effect negated, but then totally does something awesome. It steals the card for the controller's own use, making it even more difficult for the opponent to sacrifice quality cards to break the negation to get rid of Totally Awesome. In its home base deck, its XZ effect provides deck thinning, versatility, more playmaking, and fuel for its negation effect. Even when Totally is removed, If it is sent to the graveyard, it can return one water monster from the graveyard to the hand to set up future playmaking, or even recycle itself back to the extra deck. Now, at only 2200 attack, one could argue that totally does not have the raw attack power to be this high on the list. But there are certain elements in its home deck, the synergy aspect, that help mitigate the weakness of this lower attack and allow the negation ability of Awesome to truly shine. Well, well, we have hit the number one spot, and realistically, no one should be surprised what resides at number one because it hasn't shown up on the list yet, and I'd be completely crazy not to have this monster on the list. Number one, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. The lack of success seen by dinosaurs in the modern meta is certainly not the fault of their new beast of a boss monster. At 3500 attack, it can basically run over almost anything outside some of its fellow boss monsters. But wait, if it faces down an opponent it cannot run over in a fair head on fight, it plays dirty, using its one sided Book of Eclipse effect with no drawback to flip all the opponent's monsters face down and then destroys all those monsters with its effect that involves sending those face down monsters to the graveyard, evading destroyed floating effects, and not caring about what that monster's defense is, in addition to inflicting 1000 damage per downed monster. If that effect were not dirty enough, it's quick play, so it can interrupt the opponent's ability to make plays to counter its presence on the field. Similar to ABC Buster Dragon, the associated costs with this flip down effect are actually rather soft because of the synergy it has with the other monsters run in the deck, which can usually produce more playmaking rather than restrict from playmaking. Finally, its summons condition is rather easily achieved in its home dinosaur deck, and heck, it's even searchable, thus making its presence commonplace on the field and a pain in the butt for the opponent to get rid of. Well, that concludes my top 10 list of the best archetype specific boss monsters in the game. Overall, making this list was actually rather difficult, both in the monsters that just made the list near the bottom, there was a pretty big logjam, and the overall order in the middle portion of the deck. Well, that's that. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.